What a nice introduction. And I think I'll build on the speed and scale of the last discussion there and try to work with you a little bit on where we've come from in terms of the limits to growth, because now it's still the limits and beyond, because we do want to bring in some of that sense of positivism. But I do need to remind everything and everyone that we are at the risk of collapse. And this was already predicted, and I've just had a conversation with someone who actually, when the original scenarios came out, talked about the fact that no, collapse is not necessarily where we're going, and there are many who felt that it wouldn't be. But the fact of the matter is that what the limits to growth showed was that there were limits to the current and the past production patterns. There were limits to population growth on a finite planet, but they didn't say there were limits to well-being. They didn't say there were limits to actually living on this planet. And I think what's really important is that when we reread the limits, and we can disagree with some of the scenarios, the fact of the matter is that those big, huge, I mean, we're talking about totally different IT capacity 50 years ago, right? Big, huge computers and modeling predicted where we would be today in terms of a series of tipping points. So we are here, and if you look at what the limits to growth said, this supreme effort already in 1972 for our generation, you take out 1972 and the limits to growth, you could talk about it right now. You could talk about climate anxiety, you could talk about mental illness levels that are the highest they've actually ever been for this generation, and even the fact that actually they're making less than their parents. So we can talk about the fact that actually those who always believed that growth was going to give you economic stability and continue to create wealth for the many has actually created wealth for the few and has not created wealth for this particular generation. So what is wealth? Let's unpack that. And let's think through, what then do we need to do? Because I don't want to come here with a bunch of doomsday messages, even though we are in the shits. I want to come here and work with you, those of you who are investing in new technologies, who understand that we actually all need to work together to not just think about profit motives, but to think about people, planet, and prosperity, and how we can service all three and still make the money necessary to carry on. That's the goal. Because the goal is we need to find those leverage points where actually we can shift the bar, where we can actually live on this planet, because where we are today is the greatest existential risk to humanity. We are in a serious wake-up call. We have totally left the safe operating space. We can see from the IPCC report, we can see from the way in which people are interacting with the economy, which, by the way, is totally over-financialized. How is it possible that we get a positive message in the economy when 10,000 people are actually unemployed and that the shares go up for a particular company? What's happened to our economy when it's actually been totally separated from people's lives and livelihoods and simply become a monetary term and one that is linked to short-term profits? That's the problem. Of course, you also get the 3C effect, the climate, the COVID, and now the conflict on top of it. So if we started planning actually in 1972, we could have given ourselves more time to deal with coming up to the planetary boundaries. But now we have to both plan, risk manage when we're in the midst of chaos. We've got total economies that are in lockdown. We've got China that's just gone back into lockdown. We've got governments, however, that are releasing the biggest stimulus packages we've ever seen, and instead of truly investing in new infrastructure, are in many cases going back to business as usual. And we're not really addressing value chain disruption in the way that we should, because actually, by the way, 10 years ago, we already knew that we were dependent on gas. We knew it 5 years ago when we saw Crimea. We knew that we were dependent on Ukrainian wheat. And what did we do? We did nothing. How is it possible that we continuously allowed for these dependencies to encroach in our systems? How is it possible that we allowed for these types of dependencies to not go unheeded and to be totally shifted, not only in terms of trade, but focusing on local production for local consumption, investing already in the technologies that we've had for quite some time, renewable technology, energy efficiency technology, and dealing with the permitting issues that we've just heard about, and dealing with the flexibility that we need in the system in order to enable all of those technologies to come to the forefront. We've got multilateralism on the test bench, and I also just had a wonderful conversation around power. These power games that continue, this is not about real leadership. This is about geopolitical power games, which we are now facing. And even if on the climate front, we now have brought in China into the family and the United States, we now see that we've got a new power dynamic over Ukraine. And that probably is going to screw up our relationship on climate and other things, because it creates distrust, because it creates other issues linked to the geopolitical play. But we also have activism with renewed vigor. We've got the Gretas, we've got the Black Lives Matters movement. We've got so many other movements that are bringing people out into the streets and trying to tell leaders that it is time for a change. And that is having impact. And in Europe, we do have a paradigm shift. Actually, before Ukraine, we saw that the European Green Deal was going to be the horizon. It created problems with Poland. Now, after Ukraine, we're actually seeing that because of the solidarity that we're feeling due to Ukraine, Poland is coming back into the European family. Will that be a positive in terms of the European Green Deal and our climate policies? That is something that we need to watch very closely. Sorry, this is going on again. So these globally interconnected instabilities are something that the limits to growth already predicted, and that we at the Club of Rome continue to unpack and think about. But not just at the Club of Rome. In the work that I'm doing with the European Commission and the European institutions and governments, we are all trying to figure out together, how can we unpack the tensions between the social system, the economic system, the global commons, and the political system? How can you dig deep into the fact that even if you want to move fast on the energy transformation, you have to talk about access to energy and purchasing power and make sure that you don't get gilets jaunes? How do you understand those interrelationships? Because the fact of the matter is that it's only going to get more aggravated. If you look at what's happening right now, we have more extreme heat. We've got heavy rainfall, droughts, fire weather, and also oceans that are warming. All of this is happening at the same time, and it's also having an impact not only on the world's most vulnerable, but those of you who were hit by the floods here in Germany and myself in Belgium know that it can also hit us. It's becoming ever more close. So the fact is, it's co-red for humanity. And if we're all ready to take up the challenge, then I would actually ask that we realize that it's not just the environmental tipping points that are going to be our demise, it's the social tipping points. It's the fact that we have to think about mass movements. It's the fact that we need to think about political progress and what that looks like and real democracy. It's the fact that we need to look at market forces, but market forces for people, planet, and prosperity, not just for profit. And it's the fact that we need to absolutely bring in technological disruption, not to replace people, but to enhance and optimize our lives so that we can move as fast as possible towards that economic transition that we need in order to have zero carbon, but not just zero carbon, because the rest of the world is going to call it carbon and zero apartheid. We need to have zero loss of nature with zero poverty and with zero pandemics. So what we've tried to do through a new project with other leaders is to look at 21st century transformational economics and how we can bring all of this new economic thinking to the forefront now, as soon as possible. This is not about one model. This is not about just following the neoliberal model. This is about understanding a value-based economic system that actually can be based on a lot of models. The well-being model, the mission economies model, The green growth model, the post-growth model, donut economics, and beyond GDP. It means actually looking at new indicators that place a value on what is most important. Taking into account social and environmental risk in financial and economic decision-making, expanding our perspective of public goods and understanding what public goods truly are, including the global commons, correcting the inequity issues, and increasing the agency of women, and also smallholders and workers and those that are often on the front lines in many economies. It means also putting in place, and this is the new system change compass that we've introduced at the European level, 10 principles for change. Can we come back to being human? Can we come back to actually functioning with our heads, our hearts, and our souls, and understanding that through COVID and what we've just heard, we all realized what was most important to us. What was it? Was it profit? Was the fact that you had 3 cars that actually couldn't drive you anywhere because you couldn't go anywhere? Was the fact that you actually had lots of toilet paper because a lot of you probably went to the grocery store and needed to make sure that you stocked up on toilet paper? No. The most important point was that your family, you had access to social care, to health care, and that your loved ones didn't die. That is where we are, and that's what we have to tap into. And then we have to redefine what that looks like in terms of our economic and our financial systems. Not just tinkering, not just a Band-Aid approach. Because at the end of the day, and this is the new research that's come out from Earth for All, well-being is seriously declining, people. Yes, most of us are privileged. But across the board, and even in our privileged neighborhoods, we can see that there is a growing social tension, which is the upper line, and that average well-being index is going way down. This means that 21st century economics is in our hands. Our lives are in our hands. It means that we have to challenge ourselves to go far beyond just coming up with a new tech company. We have to come up with a tech company, or we need to rethink our existing multinational in the way in which it functions in today's society and ensures that it actually does privilege people, planet, and prosperity. And then unpack that into the indicators that are necessary, the criteria that are necessary, and the leadership that is necessary. Because that is what's lacking. It's not the technology. We know we have the technology to make the transformation. It's we need bold leaders. We need leaders that are ready to go beyond just a short-term political cycle and live in fear of not getting elected again, and to come back to leading people and leading society. So we need 5 key turnarounds: poverty, empowerment, equality, energy, and food. If we focus on just those 5, it actually will cost us, and the solutions that we've brought together, 4% of GDP. Not even. These are the recommendations that we are now going to be making to governments across the globe, clearly indicating how they can get to these 5 key turnarounds. Ensuring actually that we transform human development in low-income countries, putting in place universal basic dividend, looking at the way in which we engage with the IMF and the World Bank, looking at debt replacement, wealth distribution. What kind of energy systems do we really have in place to have emissions every single year? And every decade. And then the food system, shifting from industrial food to regenerative food. Most importantly, how do we empower our women? Because we are not the world here in the West. Most of the world is out there in the South. And again, what COVID taught us is we are as vulnerable as the weakest link in the system. So we must take this into consideration, and we must put it on overdrive and use social media in order to bring forward the thinking. We have to ask, start to discuss, make sure that more people are brought on the journey. This can't just be about ecological economics. This can't just be about a green party. This can't just be about an environmentalist. This can't just be about a member of the Club of Rome, like myself. It has to be driven by everyone, all of us becoming human again and realizing that actually we are faced with the greatest existential risk and the greatest challenge. Jane Goodall said, "We are the most intelligent species, but we are not the wisest." I ask each of you, As you start these conversations and as you leave this auditorium and go back to your homes, to your companies, to your governments, make yourself the wisest. Work with others to become optimized and extra wise. This has to be a collective challenge, and it has to be a collective solution, and we can do it together. These are 3 works that are moving in that direction that we have recently published, including a book that we have just released here in Germany with the help of dear Steffi, which talks about what is the world of tomorrow. And that world can be exciting, but we do need to go far beyond our comfort zone in more ways than one. So I'm asking you now to take on that challenge. I'm going to show you a little film. Thank you very much.